Welcome to the Stormsurf video surf forecast for the week starting Sunday, June 26. Looking at significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean, we see not a whole lot going on. Remnants of a gale fading in the Southeast Pacific with about 23-foot seas, and a better system with 26-plus foot seas in the Tasman Sea, taking aim on Fiji, but for the most part of no real use to anybody, but perhaps, of course, Fiji, and also Hawaii, but well filtered, that swell will be after it passes by Fiji and makes it to Hawaii. Let's get into the details. First up, we're going to go a little bit back in time. This is the last of a series of gales that developed in the South Pacific. This system here with 45-foot seas was the swell that hit California on Saturday and is fading on Sunday. And after that, one more gale actually developed here under New Zealand, a little patch of 40-foot seas, and we'll roll this out. It sort of made its way under New Zealand on Sunday into Monday, faded a little bit. Now notice another gale tried to organize here also on Tuesday of last week with nearly 40-foot seas right on the hairy edge of the Southern California swell window, but most of the energy was all aimed to the east, and no swell is expected to result. All energy targeting Chile. Now this system that passed under New Zealand then redeveloped a little bit, and this is nice. Not large seas, 30-foot seas, but aimed pretty well up the Great Circle paths to California and certainly Central America. So there is another pulse of swell coming. We'll get into that in just a second. But then after that, here we are moving into this weekend. You see not a whole lot has gone on. Here we are. Whoops. There we are is Sunday 06E, and nothing was behind that. So let's get into the details. Here's that system that passed under New Zealand. We're on Sunday here. We're looking for adjacent to satellite pass. So it said 40-foot seas over a little tiny area, but just looking at the satellite pass here, you can see 40-foot seas covered a much larger area than indicated. The average wave measure, the max average measurement, that's 15 different readings, was 40.8 feet right in this area, but with a singular reading up to 46 feet. So the model was actually undercalling it a little bit there, but that is a good long distance away from California. We got another pass at 0Z on Sunday, and much the same situation. The model here was calling for about 36-foot seas in this area, and the average reading was 38 with 1 to 40, almost 43 feet. So that bodes pretty well for that. And then yet another pass here, 30, 32, 34, 36 feet, and the average reading was 36.8 with 1 to about almost 42 feet. So that was about on track on 18Z Monday. And then we'll see if there's yet another pass on Tuesday, 18Z, a little area of 30-foot seas, but you can see 31-foot seas, but over, a much broader area than suggested, with one reading to 36.9 feet. And let's see where we go. And there's yet again 30 feet where it's suggested 28 or 29 feet. And we'll just keep going here. And yet here was 30 feet forecasted, and south of that area, still 31-foot seas with a peak reading to almost 35. And let's see if we get any more passes. And that was about, we got one there. It's supposed to be 28 feet, and that's about what it was. The average reading was 28 feet with that one little slice there, probably about 32.8 feet. So that system, and yet, let's see how we do here. That was about 27 feet, and it's the Jason 1 satellite said about 27.9 feet with one reading to 33. So the model was, if anything, undercalling it a little bit, and we'll just roll this out, and here we are into Saturday or so, and that's pretty much it. So the model appears to have undercalled the sea heights for the next in a series of storm. Let's go check out the Great Circle paths. So we'll do this kind of quick. Here is that system again. We're talking Sunday. We'll do this. This is relative to Northern California. Here it goes. Notice the first little arrow aiming reasonably well up the Great Circle path. And what is that, about the 216-degree path, which is unshadowed. 40-foot seas at about 215 unshadowed. and it's, let's see, what's that, about 38-foot seas, unshadowed on about the 212-degree path. And then once it gets past about 211, 210, then you move into the shadow of Tahiti. And so that was all shadowed through there. Then when you get to about the 204, 205, it becomes unshadowed. So let's see. But by then, let's see, that's all, most of that energy is aiming east, cutting across the Great Circle paths. We need it to be aimed to the north. And here we go. But then we got another batch of 30-foot seas up about the, about 199, 200-degree path, aimed almost directly up the paths there. A little bit off, but not horrible. So overall, for Northern California, aimed pretty well in the right direction. So now we'll do this again for Southern California. The cutoff is about 216, and sure, it's on 218 right there. And by the time it gets to 40 foot, it's pretty close to 216, just barely, let's say barely in the shadow, but there it's shadowed, all that. But by you get to 208, 209, it's unshadowed. So that's unshadowed, but aimed kind of east of the Great Circle paths to Southern California. And then here we go. It gets organized, and then well, good energy aimed up about the 203 to about the 198 before it fades out. Now, relative to Hawaii, see, here's New Zealand, and here's the shadow about 208 to 201 relative to Hawaii. So nothing happening there, till it gets to about the 201, right about there. But you see, that's the path aimed up to Hawaii, and all the energy is aimed off to the east. We'll just keep going here. It continues off these like almost 90 degrees, and it has to be 30 degrees to produce pretty much 90% of the swell energy. If it's more than 30 degrees off, is not going to radiate up to the north. And this system just didn't do very much for Hawaii. And then by the time it started aiming northeast, it was out on the 175-degree track, and that's at least 45 degrees off the angle there. So probably not a whole lot for Hawaii. Northern California actually looks to be the best, but again, it's a small system, very far away, but enough energy will arrive for all of California to provide something well rideable for later in the work week. So next we start looking at the forecast. What's to come in the Southern Hemisphere for the following week, swell production-wise? Well, we look at jet stream level winds to start with. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and when those gales do form, help direct their track. What we're looking for is a trough, that is a dip in the jet stream going to the north. Instead, what we see is a big ridge here pushing to the south, pushing over nearly Antarctica, over the entire southwest Pacific. The only sign of a little trough here is at about 110 to 100 west. That's outside of even the California swell window. And even this, at that, there's not strong winds at all. We're looking at 90-knot winds, and you want to see about 120-knot winds before you start really paying attention. So not a whole lot going on in the jet right now. And as we go through the week, just watch this down here. This ridge continues sweeping across the South Pacific. If anything, look at digging in deeper. Another pulse comes in with building winds in the 110-knot range on Thursday, and pushing even deeper into Antarctica by Friday and Saturday. This does not look promising at all. Roll this out. Now here's a little bit, actually a pretty good looking trough south of the Tasman Sea forecast on Sunday, and let's just roll this out and see where we go. It almost looks like maybe by a week from today we could have a trough developing under New Zealand, and maybe that would give us a little hope. But otherwise, just this big split jet, the southern branch all down nearly into Antarctica. So we're going to pay a little bit for these. We've had three week-long runs of swell back-to-back. This has generated what we're calling 9 significant class swells. And this, we're still in the month of June. And so to have 9 significant class swells, I think last year, at best, we ended up with 4 or 5 significant class swells, maybe some more than that, and maybe I'm thinking the year before. But either way, we're kind of on a roll. This is very normal, expected. The summer past El Nino in the northern hemisphere. El Nino sort of fuels the storm track for a little bit till it finally fades out, and that's exactly what's been going on. The active phase of the MJO also adding some fuel to the fire. So we've been the swell production has been pretty prolific. It's reasonable reasonable that we would pay at some point. And we'll get a little bit into that as it relates to the MJO in just a few minutes. But from a jet stream perspective, not a whole lot going on. So next we go inspect surface level pressure, surface level winds. We're looking for gales or low pressure or fetch or anything aimed to the northeast or north for Hawaii. And as expected, based on the jet stream charts, we don't expect to see anything here, and certainly not a whole lot going on. We'll just roll this out. I mean, there's little bits of 30-knot winds, but we really need 40 to 45-knot winds. Here's a little bit of fetch, but notice it's all aimed south, and even that, it's only 30 knots. You're not going to get any swell large enough to make the whole journey, the 6,000 mile journey to the north. You need enough wind to generate at least a 16-second period swell, which means at least 40-knot winds. So we'll just blast through this here. Now here's a gale. Here's a gale on Thursday, but again, all energy aimed due south. Not a whole lot happening. A little bit of a low here. It's cut-off low. The models tend to over-exaggerate the wind speeds in cut-off lows. At least that's been our experience. So this is suggesting 50-knot winds on Friday night. Find that hard to believe, but we'll see. Roll this out. And here is another, whoa, I didn't even see this before. Here's another low forecast. Again, 45-knot winds aimed sort of south and almost south. I guess it'd be southeast relative to Hawaii. It's 55-knot winds right there on Saturday, Sunday. It seems a little bit suspect given what the jet's doing. Anyway, we'll roll this out, take a look some more, and we're 180 hours out and nothing else on the charts. Let's go take a look at the significant wave charts. The interesting part here is if any of this is true over here, then maybe things aren't as bad as we suggested. So here we go, significant wave heights for the South Pacific Ocean. Let's start rolling this out, looking for anything. We saw some areas of interest further out on the model in the South Pacific. Let's see how it materializes here. Here's first that one little system southeast of New Zealand, 30-foot seas on Friday night. So that's 126 hours out. Odds of that developing at this early date pretty low. 32-foot seas aimed at Tahiti and Hawaii to a certain degree. Then here's this other system, very interesting, 32, 34-foot seas roughly, building to, in the, 39-foot, aimed due north. Still highly suspect, seeing that the jet is providing no real support. And interesting also, we looked back at, this is the 18Z run of the model. We looked back at the 06Z run, and this wasn't there at all. So this could be just a fluke by the models. But what the heck? If it happens, any swell is better than no swell at all. So it's something to watch. But other than that, actually there's two little systems here this week. Both look pretty meager, not very strong, and way out on the charts. Odds of it happening are pretty low at this point in time. Let's go take a look long term. What's coming beyond a week out? So first off, we start looking at winds on the equator, and specifically in the region between about 170 west back to about 135 east and just 5 degrees north and south of the equator. As expected, trades are in control here, and this is the anomaly chart, differences in normal from this time of year. And what we're seeing is the trades are actually a little bit stronger than normal. This would suggest, at a minimum, the inactive phase of the MJO. And if these trades continued like this for a month or two beyond a normal MJO cycle, then one could theoretically say maybe La Nina was starting to have an effect. Clearly, I haven't even looked at this, but if you were to look here and look at these are water temperatures, differences from normal. Colder than normal waters here. That's due to stronger trades and a host of other things going on. Then clearly one would say La Nina is already having an influence. Let's take a look at the wind pattern as of late. Again, the Kelvin wave generation area is roughly between here and here. This is back in May when we got in the oranges and the yellows, and it's only the Kelvin wave generation area we're interested. That seems to have the biggest influence on both the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere Pacific weather patterns and the propensity to support storm development. Notice June 1, we got westerly anomalies in that area, and that went the whole way through the middle part of June. And it was during this window here that we had those three different storm systems. Actually, it was complexes. We call it a complex storm. It's really multiple low-pressure systems, one right after the other. And that's what has generated most all of the 9 significant class swells we've had. But here we are starting June 16th, about what was that? A little bit beyond that. Let's say maybe the 18th or so. About a week ago, east anomalies started building in pretty strong, a clear sign of at least the inactive phase of the MJO, and the storm machine is shutting down as a result of that. Now, the good news is supposedly come early July, westerly anomalies move back into the picture pretty weak, but maybe that gives us some hope, at least per this model. So what we're looking for is the presence of the active or inactive phase of the MJO. Right now, June 25th, the statistic model, these blues suggest where the active phase of the MJO is, somewhere over the maritime continent, trying to work its way into the West Pacific, with the inactive phase right over the Kelvin wave generation area, but rather weak according to this down at the surface. And for the next 2 weeks, per this, the statistic model, the active phase is supposed to work its way into the West Pacific. That would be a good sign. The dynamic model here, not nearly as encouraging, suggesting the active phase of the MJO is basically to dissipate over the maritime continent, and then supposedly an inactive phase developing 2 weeks out. Then these are the phase diagrams. So assume this isn't, but imagine you're looking down on the North Pole of our planet, and you go from the maritime continent, let's think like Bali in that area, over the dateline, into the West Pacific, over the Americas, into the Atlantic Ocean, across Africa and Europe, and then back into the Indian Ocean. And the MJO travels this way, counterclockwise on these charts. This is where the active phase of the MJO is, and I think all the other charts pretty much buy into that. Basically right over the maritime continent. The ECMF model suggests that the active phase of the MJO is basically just supposed to start crashing about a day or two out and never make it to the West Pacific. And the GEFS says basically the same thing. So that means no westerly anomalies over the West Pacific and no support for gale development. So this is our more trusty model. For those other models are really geared towards just looking a week, maybe 2 weeks out at best. This one's the one that's good for looking a month or 2 or 3 months into the future, the CFS model. And again, so it's a little bit different. Kelvin wave generation area from here over to about here. This is about 120 east. So up in this area here, the yellows, of course, are westerly anomalies. This is back in time. Big westerly wind burst back in February associated with El Nino. Another little baby one back in April. This was the last pulse of the active phase of the MJO here in June that we were talking about. This is what created all the surf, and that is still radiating into California in this date. And then here's where things kind of went inactive. Let's overlay the MJO, and according to this, we're in the inactive phase of the MJO over the Kelvin wave generation area. The solid red lines are the active phase of the MJO, and it's supposed to start moving, at least in some weak fashion, starting, let's say about July 2nd or 3rd, like maybe next weekend, and that westerly anomalies are supposed to develop. The GEFS model says basically the same sort of thing. So maybe there's a little window here for a 2-week run of some swells, at least some support for storm production. But then you get into mid-July or so, easterly anomalies forecast here, inactive phase of the MJO, and things just don't look really good. So the sort of the point being, the swell we've gotten so far, I hope you got a lot of it. If you haven't, go out and get whatever dribbles you can right now. There's a little more swell coming. Make the most of that. But it kind of looks like things are going to shut down once we get into later July. And then there's another active phase of the MJO forecast sometime in the mid to late August time frame, but most of these westerly anomalies never even make it to the date line. The date lines are like running here, so not so sure about that either. Now, here's one other way to look at things, okay? We'll take that out. Low-pass filter. This is a way to look at El Nino or see where the propensity for westerly anomalies and or precipitation are over anywhere in the planet. This chart is the whole planet. This spans the entire planet. Just so happens El Nino forms in the Pacific, which is good for us, but come about the end of August, it's all but gone. And notice the contours, the dark contours here, start developing in the Indian Ocean, and that would be a clear sign of La Nina. And notice these dotted lines here. This is sort of the anti-El Nino, or La Nina, if you will, in the Pacific Ocean, and right where the Kelvin wave generation area is by the fall. That would suggest that propensity for storm development and the active phase of the MJO and all the things you need to make a good storm cycle aren't going to be there. Not unexpected. Typically you fall into La Nina after a pretty strong El Nino like we've had, so this is no big surprise. Next, we look at water temperature subsurface. That is, here's the West Pacific, here's the East Pacific. We're going down 100 meters, that's 300 feet. And during El Nino, all warm water is here in the east, not cold, but less warm water in the west. But now that we've moved into a La Nina kind of pattern, you see 30-degree anomalies here in the West Pacific, and the isotherm, or the depth of the warm pool, getting shallower here in the East Pacific. The 28-degree isotherm line is now, it was holding here about 158. It's retreating to about 162. And it maybe will even go a little bit further west than that. Subsurface-wise, this is really what we're interested in. The differences in normal for this time of year. We see pretty much a normal pattern at the surface in the West Pacific. Also, that in the far East Pacific, what we see here subsurface is just big pool of cooler normal water, -3, -4 degrees, almost 5 degrees below normal. And that is gurgling up to the surface here at, where is that, 140 right there. So just a little bit south of Hawaii on the equator. Classic La Nina kind of setup. If it was El Nino, you would have pockets of warm water instead of cold water migrating from west to east. We don't have any of that, and no sign of any warm water to come in the near future. That's because a lot of warm water has to build here. We've tapped out the reservoir. That's what El Nino does. When you get too big of an imbalance here, basically trades reverse, take that warm water, push it off to the east, but that's all tapped out now. So now we sort of, everything flip-flops, and it's all about building warm water in the West Pacific again, and it'll do that for the next 4 to 5 years. And here's a high-res version of that chart. Same sort of deal. Cool water everywhere where there would be normally Kelvin waves and warm water. Classic La Nina kind of setup, subsurface. And now let's take a look at sea surface temperature anomalies. The blues, of course, are colder than normal. And you can see cooler waters building along the coast of Peru, working their way to the Galapagos, and then blowing cooler the whole way out to 160 west. That point where, remember, we saw all that cold water subsurface porting itself to the surface. It was right around in this area. This is just classic La Nina kind of setup. No denying it. Here's the trend chart for the past 7 days. Blues are water temperatures trending cooler. We see that off of Africa right here. We also see a lot of it going on right where we see cold water already. Strong trades, of course, causing upwelling, but more so cool subsurface water making its way to the surface. and just cooling things down. Also notice relatively warm temperatures off of Cabo and that area. It was building up into California, but recently the north winds have picked up and are to build pretty strong this week, 30 knots on the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday time frame, Cape Mendocino. So if anything, we'll see temperatures falling in this region, but relatively warm elsewhere. Little bit of signs of the PDO. Here's again sea surface temperatures anomaly, but backed off a little bit. You can see definitely cool pool right where you would want to see warm waters. It's interesting that there's all this warm water here, off in here. We're not sure how much of this is for real or not. You know, we've talked about this the last update last week, that maybe the ocean temperatures are just warming and they have to update the climatology. It's kind of hard to believe there's this much warm water still hanging around. And this is, you know, in the 1.5 to 2 degrees above normal. Maybe, we'll see. But clearly, we're going to ignore that and just say, cool water here, cool water off in here, a little bit of warm water here. This is classic at this point. Active phase of the PDO here, the plus phase of the PDO, and of course we've talked about this in the past, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation tends to support, when it's in the active state or the positive phase, tends to support the formation of El Nino, and there's some thoughts that we maybe have switched over to the plus side of the PDO. We won't know. It's, again, this is a 15 to 30 year on-off kind of thing. And we've been in a 15-year run of the negative phase of the PDO, and just in 2014 we got some signs that it was starting to switch, and so far that still seems to be the case. Too early to call it. Anyway, La Nina is the big long-term indicator for now. Next, we'll talk about atmospheric coupling. How's the ocean the atmosphere responding to what's going on in the ocean? This is the 30-day running average for the Southern Oscillation Index. This is a good way. You can actually see inactive phase of the MJO, active phase of the MJO. This is back in 2014. This is when El Nino started. The trend was down till October 2015. That's about when El Nino peaked out. Then it sort of bottomed out hanging around here, but notice there's a distinct upward trend here. Again, another sign of the development of La Nina. And here's actually daily values from the Southern Oscillation Index. You know, if you were looking at the active phase of the MJ, you'd expect to see negative numbers here. We don't see a whole lot of it. Instead, we're seeing today's value, 13.10, and the trend has been, for the most part, pretty positive. So whenever active phase we had, it wasn't super obvious. The 30-day running average, that chart we just saw, at plus 2.29, again, kind of neutral. The 90-day running average, still negative, minus 5.61, suggestive of El Nino, but you notice the trend is slowly and steadily upward, and we expect that to slowly fade out here in the next month or two and start going positive. The ESPI index here, basically like the Southern Oscillation Index, it's all about precipitation and differences in normal in precipitation in these areas here, north of Darwin and, you know, south of Hawaii or north of Tahiti, that area. Negative anomalies suggest drier than normal conditions. We've been positive, lots of above normal precipitation in these areas. Due to El Nino, but that is fading out according to this. So again, pretty normal given where we are in the El Nino-La Nina cycle. And then finally, a quick look at sea surface temperature forecast given by the trusty CFS version 2 model. For the Nino 3.4 region, this is the area where that you use to monitor El Nino. And back in July, October, of course, water temperature anomalies almost 3 degrees above normal, 2.5 degrees. A very strong El Nino indeed. But you can see the transition underway here. We're in the end of, right about there, the end of June. And we're right at about neutral. The forecast is for the water temperature anomalies to go to about minus 0.75, something like that, into the October time frame, then hover there and slowly start working their way up. In terms of a La Nina, that's not a very strong La Nina, and that, if it plays out like this, would indicate that perhaps the PDO is having some influence and going to dampen La Nina's influence. That means that, yeah, we're going to pay the price here probably this coming winter. But after that, or, maybe even 2 winters. But remember, we've been through 15 years of this just a very unsupportive Pacific decadal oscillation. If we can eke our way out of that and pay the price for a year or 2 here, the future will look very much brighter if the PDO is turning towards the active phase. Way too early to know, but at least a little bit of encouragement. So the short term, one more swell, midweek for California. Just a little bit of energy for Hawaii, but not a whole lot. Most of it's targeting California. Mid to the end of the week, even into the weekend. And then after that, things look to go quiet. The model suggests maybe a storm a week out, but nothing super strong. But at this point, waves are waves. The inactive phase of the MJO appears to be setting up, so it'll dampen the swell production machine for a couple of weeks. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Go do some work, go take care of some chores, do what you got to do. And then we wait for the next active phase of the MJO. And it is on the charts and not that far out, only about a week or 2 out. So we'll see what happens from that. Of course, long term, La Nina still looks to be building. And so that doesn't get things really exciting for this coming winter. But, we'll still get surf. It just doesn't mean that it'll be huge and out of control or, not like the El Nino hype of last winter. But anyway, good run of surf has been in the water. Hope everyone's got some of it. Go get whatever dribbles you can and get some more of it later this week because it looks like things are settling down for a little bit. So that's it for this week. We'll do this again next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks for watching. Get some waves. Thanks.